This is Year 8 revision for Pythagoras' theorem. Question 1. Complete each sentence with the appropriate words. Pythagoras' theorem is only for right-angled triangles. Pythagoras' theorem states that the square of the hypotenuse, now remember the hypotenuse is the longest side, is equal to the square is equal to the sum of the squares of the other shorter sides. Now I'm going to show you this in a diagram. Now I've just put the diagram here. So here in blue we've got the right angle triangle. There's a little right angle here in this corner which we actually can't see. And the lengths of the sides of this right angle triangle, the shorter sides are 3 and 4, and the longer side here, remember the longer side is called the hypotenuse, and it's always opposite the right angle. So if we draw a square on this longest side, so if we've got side length 5 there, we come out 5 units here, and if we draw up all these little squares, 5 times 5 is 25, so this square of 25 is equal to these other two squares. See, if we draw a square on this side length of 4, we go 4 times 4 is 16. If we draw a square on this side with side length 3, we go 3 times 3 is 9. If you add the 16 plus 9, you get 25. That's why Pythagoras' theorem states that the square on the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the squares on the two shorter sides. So if you just try and remember that diagram, that should help you remember the rule. Now in question 2, we're asked which side of this triangle is the hypotenuse. So we've got a right angle triangle, and the right angle is at what we call vertex R, and the hypotenuse is always opposite the right angle. So the side of the triangle that is the hypotenuse is the side ST. So our answer for question 2 is C, which is ST. Now in question 3, we're asked which is the correct Pythagoras' theorem for this triangle. Remember that we should always circle the hypotenuse, so we'll just do that first. So as you can see, I've put a circle around the hypotenuse. So this hypotenuse is the longest side, and remember the longest side squared equals the two shorter sides squared. So the two shorter sides are D and M. So the correct Pythagoras' theorem would be the hypotenuse squared, so U squared equals M squared plus D squared, and that answer there is D. In question 4 again, we're asked which is the correct Pythagoras' theorem for this triangle. Again, start by circling your longest side, which is the hypotenuse. So the hypotenuse is K. So we know that K squared equals R squared plus 10 squared. I'll just put that in first. So we've got K squared, which is the longest side. So K squared, the longest side squared, is the sum of the two shorter sides squared. So K squared is R squared plus 10 squared. Now if we look at our answers here, we can see that that doesn't seem to be one of the answers. So what we're going to do, we're just going to rearrange this equation, and we'll just rearrange it by taking over we're just going to see what R squared is. So if we want to see what R squared is, we'll need to take this plus 10 squared and take it over to the other side. So we'll get that R squared, actually I'll just add another row in there. So as I said, we can't see this first line in any of these answers. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to move this plus 10 squared over to the other side. So the opposite of plus 10 squared, if I lift that over to the other side, I get minus 10 squared. So I've got K squared minus 10 squared is R squared. Now I'm just going to swap sides here and say R squared is K squared minus 10 squared, and we can see that that answer there is C. That one is a little bit tricky, so don't worry about that one too much. As long as you're able to write up the first row, that would be okay. Okay, now for question 5. If R squared equals 10 squared plus 4 squared, what is the value of R? I'll just bring the working out over here. So we'll start with R squared equals 10 squared plus 4 squared. On your calculator, you can just enter, because we've got all the numbers over here on the right-hand side, after the equal sign, you can just go to your calculator and do 10 squared. Now to do 10 squared, you press 10 and then you press the x squared button, and then plus 4 squared, again plus 4, and press the x squared button. You'll get 116 as your answer. So that is what r squared is. Now we need to get r on its own. So remember, when you're trying to solve equations, you have to do the opposite of what's there attached to the r. So the opposite of r squared, so the opposite of squared, is to square root. So if r squared is 116, then r is the square root of 116. So on your calculator, you just press square root 116 and you'll get that r is 10.77. And if we want to round that off to 2 decimal places, we just look at the third decimal place, which is the 0, and that is less than 5, so it just rounds down to, sorry, my screen has just moved, I'll just fix it up. So if you want to round that off, you just look at the third decimal place, which is the 0, and that's less than 5, so it just rounds down to r is 10.77. Now for question 6, where we have to find w. So this is, a typical problem that you might get. To start this problem, of course, we should circle our hypotenuse, which is w. I'll just do that now. So I'll just circle the hypotenuse. It's the longest side. So w is the hypotenuse. Okay, so our question is to find w. Now we've circled the longest side, which is the hypotenuse. So we write our first statement out, which is w squared equals 4.2 squared plus 5.6 squared. So I'll just bring that over. So we've got w squared equals 4.2 squared plus 5.6 squared. Now the next thing we want to do, we've got 4.2 squared plus 5.6 squared, so we can just work that out on our calculator. And if you do that on your calculator, 4.2 squared plus 5.6 squared, you'll get 49. So that's what w squared is. Now, w, we want to get w on its own, and, sorry, I've got an r there. To get w on its own, you need to do the opposite of squared, which is square root. So therefore, w is the square root of 49. And if you press that on your calculator, you will get that w equals 7. So do square root of 49 on your calculator, and you'll get that the answer is 7. Now for question 7, you're asked to find y. Now again, y is the longest side, so we should put a circle around the y. So I've circled the longest side, which is opposite the right angle. Now I've circled the hypotenuse, so we can write y squared equals 6 squared plus 8 squared. Now we can just work out 6 squared plus 8 squared on our calculator because they're there next to each other. So then we get that y squared equals 100. Now to get y on its own, y is the square root of 100. So y squared is 100, so y will be the square root of 100. And you enter that on your calculator. So on your calculator, just go square root of 100, and your answer will be that y equals 10. Now for question 8, start off by circling the hypotenuse, which is 75. Now we know therefore that 75 squared equals 72 squared plus x squared. But because we're trying to find this x first, we should always write the letter that we're trying to find first, which is x. So we should really start off by saying x squared plus 72 squared is 75 squared. So I'm just going to do that first. So because we want to find the x, we should write that first. And that's one of the shorter sides. So we do the two shorter ones, we add them two together, and they equal the longer one that's circled. So x squared plus 72 squared is 75 squared. You can see that over here. Now, we cannot go straight to our calculator yet because I've got a 72 squared on this side and I've got a 75 squared on that side. So what I need to do is work out 72 squared on my calculator and write it out here, and work out 75 squared on my calculator and write it down there. So I'm just going to do that now. And you will get that x squared plus 5184 equals 5625 when you work those two things out. Now, remember we're trying to find x squared, but there is this plus 5184 that's next to it. So this plus 5184 needs to go over to the other side, and the opposite of plus 5184 is minus 5184. So we subtract 5184, so we end up with x squared equals 5625, bring this plus 5184 over, and we get minus 5184. Now the two numbers are next to each other on the right hand side, so we can just get our calculator out and do 5625 minus 5184, and you'll get that x squared is 441. Now that's what x squared is. We want to work out what x is, and remember we need to square root now. So x will be the square root of 441. So on your calculator, work out the square root of 441 and you'll get that x is 21. Now for question 9. We should always look for the longest side first, which is opposite the right angle. So 6 is our longest side, it's the hypotenuse. So I'm just going to put a circle around that. Now remember, we're trying to find out what t is, which is down here. We're looking for t. So we know that t squared plus 4 squared equals 6 squared. So we should write the t first because that's what we're looking for. So we're just going to bring that over now. So we've got t squared plus 4 squared is 6 squared. So once again, t squared plus 4 squared equals 6 squared. Now we need to work out what 4 squared and 6 squared are, so we can just do that on our calculator. And 4 squared is 16, so we get t squared plus 16 equals, now 6 squared is 36 on your calculator. Now remember, we're trying to work out t, so we need to move this plus 16 over to the other side. And when we take it over to the other side, we pick it up and take it over, it becomes t squared equals 36 minus 16. Now we can do 36 minus 16 on our calculator and we'll get that t squared equals 20. Remember, we're trying to work out t, so t is the square root of 20, and on your calculator you can work out the square root of 20 and you'll get 4.47213. And remember, we're trying to get 2 decimal places because all our answers have 2 decimal places there. So we need to look at the third decimal place, which is the one after the 7. So 4.47, we need to look at the third decimal place, which is that 2. And that 2 is less than 5, so the 7 in front of it stays the same. So our answer is 4.47. Now for the last question, which is just in this little video, it's question 10. First, we'll circle the longest side, which is the hypotenuse. That's the 11. So we know that the two shorter sides add up to the longer one. Now, because we're trying to find k, we should write that first. So we go k squared plus 4 squared equals 11 squared. We can then work out what 4 squared and 11 squared are. So we get k squared plus 16 is 121. Remember, we're trying to work out k squared, so that plus 16 needs to move over to the other side. And we get k squared is 121 minus 16. We can work that out on our calculator now. 121 minus 16 is 105. And remembering that we're just trying to work out k, so if k squared is 105, then k will be the square root of 105. And just working that out on your calculator, you'll get that k is 10.24695. Now we need to round it to 2 decimal places because all our answers are 2 decimal places. So 10.24, the 4 is the second decimal place. Looking at the third decimal place, which is the 6. So that 6 that we're looking at now, that's 5 or more. So we need to round the 4 up in front of it to a 5. So we end up with k equals 10.25. And that's the end of this first video. The next video will start from question 11.